bit from, oh, okay. So we got the recording. Welcome to the book club. Here's some chat if you want to follow Lisa, our wonderful host. She did a little introduction for me. Mine is in the chat as well. And we're just starting to introduce our book club writer, Elizabeth. So I will start. Elizabeth L. Silver is the author of the novel The Majority from Riverhead Publishing, as well as the memoir, The Tincture of Time, a memoir of medical uncertainty from Penguin Press in 2017. And the execution of, is it No? I wanted to know how to say his name or her name.
Her name is Noah.
Noah, that was my instinct. Noah P. Singleton from Crown 2013. Her work has been called fantastic by the Washington Post, masterful by the Wall Street Journal, and important by the LA Times. She's been published in 7 languages and optioned for film. The Execution of Noah P. Singleton was an Amazon Best Book of the Year, the Amazon Best Debut of the Month, a Kirkus Best Book of the Summer, Kansas City Star Best Book of the Year, and a selection for the Target Emerging Author Series. The Tincture of Time was featured on PBS, NPR, and O Magazine Oprah's 10 Best Books to Pick Up Now.
Elizabeth has also been featured on PBS NewsHour, while her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Magazine, Ms. Magazine, The Guardian, Harper's Bazaar, McSweeney's, the Dallas Morning News, Catamaran Literary Journal, and many more. She currently teaches creative writing with the UCLA Writers Program.
And if that wasn't enough, she's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, the MFA program in creative writing from the University of East Anglia in England, and Temple University Beasley's School of Law. Elizabeth has also worked as an attorney in California and Texas, where she was a judicial clerk for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. She worked on death row cases in Texas and subsequently in civil litigation in Los Angeles. She continues to keep a foot in the law, and her most recent legal volunteer work, and I guess all her spare time, includes working on asylum cases at the Texas-Mexican border and with survivors of domestic abuse in LA. She's also the founder and director of Onward Literary Mentoring, a program that connects writers with award-winning and best-selling authors for individual tailored writing instruction. She was born and raised in New Orleans and Dallas. She lives in LA with her family and a dog that may make an appearance at some time. And if you haven't read the book and you're just here to enjoy this interview, let me tell you a little bit about this unforgettable novel. A living novel of motherhood and ambition, love and friendship, and one woman's fight to be a Supreme Court justice. Quote from Sylvia, our main character: "History is only good as the historians, and I am no longer trusting them to tell my story. Half of the United States is waiting for Justice Sylvia Olin Bernstein to die. The other half is praying for her to hold on. At 83, the contemptuous SOB doesn't have much time left, but she does have is her story. Covering the span of 50 years, Sylvia's personal account reveals the intimate truth about a woman who is not just a brilliant mind, but a daughter, a best friend, a wife, and a mother. Caught between the competing desires of career and family, truth and convenience, progress and patience, she will be given a chance to change the course of American history. Set against the vibrant sweep of the 20th century, the majority brings us into the sacrifices, heartaches, and complex emotional life of a powerful woman ahead of her time, whose life and work turn out to have supreme stakes." We are so excited that you're here, Elizabeth. I have a lot of questions for you. I'm sure our viewers do as well. But before we begin diving in, I wondered if you would give us, like to start with a reading from The Majority.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and thrill to be here, so thank you. I thought I would just read the opening, which is a kind of sets the
I think it's a great place to start because we get her voice. We get her at her best. Absolutely.
Perfect, great. So this, for those of you who haven't read the book, this just kind of sets up the book as kind of this this fake memoir, this fictional memoir. And so here we go. Starts off: found in the desk of the late Sylvia Olin Bernstein, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Half of the United States is waiting for me to die. The other half stands by, candles in hand, praying for me to hang on. At least that's what they tell me. At least that's what they say, but people never really want what they think they want. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from October through April, the main doors of the Supreme Court open at 8. There are only 50 seats available for the general public, and by 9:30 a.m., those eager visitors who waited outside for hours will have secured most of them. Sometimes, when nobody's there, I walk into the main courtroom to sit in the back of the gallery. The perspective is different, almost more ominous. From there, I can see 4 marble columns standing tall before deep mahogany curtains edged in gold. When I was younger, I used to stare at the curtains in pictures and later in person, sometimes wanting to hide in them. Now, I know better than to hide. On the days we have argument, a court crier pushes the buzzer, warning the crowd that there are 5 minutes to prepare and take a seat. The 9 of us wait in the robing room backstage where no one can visit, beginning the process of coming out into the courtroom. We have a private pregame ritual, a rotating handshake among all 9 of us as if to say, yes, we are all in this together. Everyone takes part in this tradition, now between 6 men and 3 women who sometimes like each other and sometimes hate each other when the robe is on and tolerate each other when it's off. The court crier opens his mouth. Oyez, oyez, oyez. We walk out of the robing room to take our places behind our specific chairs at the bench. Mine is marked with a tiny gold plaque carved with the initials S.O.B. I take my seat. The Chief Justice glances to either side and picks up his gavel, slamming the wood with a single pound. It pierces the silence as I scan the gallery. My eyes are old, though. They don't always see what's in front of them. My hair has faded from the yellow, stubborn blonde of my youth, and I've lost some of my height, though having started at 5 feet 11 inches, I'm still taller than most of the men who've surrounded me for decades. As arguments open, all eyes are on me, wondering what I'm thinking. But it's my own eyes, still a clear light blue, that are the first to reveal the truth. If you look closely enough, you might have to reconsider everything you know about me, everything you thought you knew about the first female Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America, the Honorable Justice Sylvia Olin Bernstein. The first time I sat in that chair, I felt an unnecessary distance from a breathing life, as if I were meant to be protected by an older code. Outside, people waved signs of praise, of hate, of hope that the contemptuous SOB might make a change. I hated the name. Just call me bitch, I wanted to say. I'm nobody's son. You see, everyone thinks that I broke the rules, but I didn't. Not really, I just oiled them up a bit for everyone else. But biographers want to present me like that. Pretty but rough. Demanding but kind, a model for how to get to the top as a woman and be remembered in history with elegance and idealism. But this is the true story, though. I wouldn't be here if I'd had the luck of my cousin Mariana, or if I'd fought the fight like my friend Linda. Still, history chooses whom to crown an iconoclast, whether they deserve it or not. But history is only as good as the historians, and I'm no longer trusting them to tell my story. All right.
I'm so glad that you started with that because I wanted to talk. We always, work on our grabber, our first 5 pages. They're the most important. Did you always know that you were going to start with her looking back at the life, or did this idea of introducing us to the SOB, having her already be there and getting her feisty voice already, how did that come to be, this opening? Because it sets it up, because then we go, suddenly she's a child and we have her whole life to catch up to this moment that you start with.
Yeah, I think the answer would sort of be kind of yes and no. And I've noticed now in all of my books that I tend to do that. I think it's kind of a habit of mine because I like to kind of figure out the voice and kind of have a general idea. And so I like the idea of I know where I'm going, and we kind of know what the end result is. We know she's going to be on the Supreme Court. That's not the question. That's not the question is, how does she get there, and what does it take, and what does it look like? And so I think that one of the first sentences I did write was, half of the country is waiting for me to die. And so
Mm.
I kind of stuck with that, but I didn't know exactly what form it would take. I think early on it was always going to be this sort of kind of fake memoir, fictional memoir that she writes, kind of looking back. But it changed. Then it changed, and it wasn't, and then it was, and then it got pulled back, and that section got embedded in the middle. And then I was like, no, I think that's how it has to start, because that's her kind of authoritative voice at the end of her life, and we know where she's winding up, but we want to see how she gets there.
I want to start even just with the title, The Majority, because I read actually that you would kind of the working title had been Memoirs of a Justice, and you changed it to The Majority, and then that hits that theme of us women being in the majority, but the minority in power. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Memoirs of a Judge to the minority, the majority, and we are, but we aren't, and we still are struggling with that. I was really interested in that part of it as well.
Yeah, it's so funny because in some ways I still think of it as Memoirs of a Justice, because it was Memoirs of a Justice for, oh gosh, this book had about a 6-year gestation period. And so it was Memoirs of a Justice for since inception. I mean, I came up with that title very, very early, and even since I sold it to my publisher. And we changed the title in the middle of the like in the editorial process. Actually, I think even after editorial, once we kind of were moving on to the publishing part, in many real ways, to be completely honest, because we were worried that readers and booksellers they were worried that it might get confused with an actual memoir, with the nonfiction book, and it's a novel, right? And so and I thought, well, what about Memoirs of a Geisha? And but I understood that concern, and so we thought a lot about it, and I thought, okay, The Majority, that makes perfect sense because it has so many meanings. For just on a legal level, a majority opinion in an appellate court, in the Supreme Court, the majority opinion becomes the law, at least in the common law. And so, on the one hand, you've got a majority opinion, that's the law, and obviously, the larger meaning is that it's about women who are the majority population in America, but the minority in power. And so I was really exploring those themes very directly in the book. And then obviously it had that double meaning with the law.
And then the cover is just gorgeous, but it's sort of a fake out because she has one of these, but yet does not wear that. Can you
Yes.
explain the decision about the cover and then your decision to have her want the simple robe to stand on its own, which I thought was so her at the end, so her owning her power early in her Supreme Court career. It happens really towards almost the end of the book. But that was such a nice, because it has a Ruth Gator Benz. It's got an RGB kind of vibe to it, which I actually love as well. But tell me a little bit about that, and then the decision that she had to not wear, because it starts with a V. I'm forgetting what the word
The
is.
jabot, the collar, the jabot. So that, I mean, there are a few different cover options that we went through, and I absolutely love this one. And I love that you pointed out the fact that she chooses not to wear it, and which you don't really find that out until the very end. But it is very important. Since you said this is a spoiler book club, I will just be able to add to that. So that's fun, since I usually don't do that in these interviews. But her daughter gives her the collar, and so it's extremely special and important because of their relationship. But she chooses not to wear it because that is her own reason. And in many ways, the women who historically, RBG, Sandra Day O'Connor, who are really known for wearing these collars, and RBG certainly has a different collar for each, different things, like she has her dissenting color and her majority, all the different kinds. They wore that as a kind of a differentiation, to kind of serve as some sort, men had the ties that would poke through. And so that's why these beautiful collars, the jabots, they started wearing them because, they didn't have the ties, which obviously does not matter now. But, at the time in the early 80s and the 90s, that was a thing. And also kind of really is also somewhat emblematic of just a history of judicial presence, dating back centuries, and looking in Europe, and the barristers of England and things like that, who do wear the white collar. But this book cover, interestingly, it we had a few different book covers that didn't look like this at all. And they were more kind of pinpointed on a particular time because the book is set, you know, part in the late 40s, part in the early 60s, mid 70s, mid 80s. But, you know, that didn't necessarily reflect the full book if you're just picking one particular time period. And this, I thought, really beautifully reflected the entire book and the entire kind of idea of what this is. And so we were coming up with ideas, and I actually sent an image, and this is actually kind of an artistic rendering of Sandra Day O'Connor's Jabot, which is, but everybody thinks it's RBG's, which makes sense, because she is the most known and she's most inspirational to me, certainly. But Sandra Day O'Connor being the first, this is actually kind of a rendering of hers. And so, but it has kind of that faded look that, you know, looks like it's kind of flowing in the air a little bit. But I love it because it's simple, but gets that kind of idea across. And so even though she does not actually put one on, and you're absolutely right, and I absolutely love that you kind of, that you pinpointed that and noticed that, I think when you pick it up, you have an idea of what the book is going to be about, with the color.
So tell me a little bit, because you, in the back of the book, you kind of tell a little bit of like what you did to write the story. And you read all the biographies, you studied the court, but you were interested in like a human story, like what happened before. You said, I saw an interview, what happened before they got to the throne. So can you tell me a little bit about that decision to, I mean, it's sort of like when we eulogize someone and we're only doing the high points and we're not really getting into who they were, that you wanted to get into the nitty gritty and the uncomfortable and the mistakes and the regrets. So why was that important to you as a writer, as a lawyer, as a woman and a mother, all of those things?
I think those are the parts that we need to hear. Those are the parts that I personally want to know. We have so many incredible biographies out there. There's so many women that I look up to, but I don't want to only look up to the icons that and not show their mistakes or show their kind of very curated mistakes. And I want to see the regrets, and I want to see the things that have been on the cutting room floor of those biopics or those biographies. And I wanted to know about their mistakes, and I wanted to know about the relationships. And in many ways, kind of, I started this book, the idea for it kind of came to me. You were all in San Diego when I was driving home from an event at Warwick in San Diego, for my last book, for my second book. And there was almost not an event that I did for that second book that people didn't ask me who was watching my kids. And I had like a baby at the time. At that point, I had a 1 and a 3-year-old. And now I have an 8 and 10-year-old. But no matter what, and people weren't necessarily asking me that when I practiced law, so that's interesting. But still, they were asking people, and it frustrated me, obviously. And I have a lot more to say on that. But kind of jumping to the specifics of this book, I was driving home to LA from on the 101, I think, all the way up, the coastline, and it was like 11, 12 o'clock at night. It was really, really late. And I was just thinking, not comparing in the least, but I was just thinking about some of these powerful women. And, I'm like thinking of Hillary Clinton. I'm thinking of Nancy Pelosi. I'm thinking of all of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was still alive at this time. I'm like, do they get asked these questions? Obviously they do, and it's terrible, but it was also kind of like, do they ever feel like a fraud? It was more that. It was kind of like, are they having arguments that I'm having about childcare? Are they having arguments with their spouses or their partners about the minutia? Are they getting asked similar or weirder questions? And obviously their jobs are so important and so essential and take up so much time, but I was interested in not hearing whatever that beautiful curated answer would be, or the one that had been written in the book that I'd read. I wanted to know about the arguments and the fights with their kids, and what led to that point, because when we see them, they're already there. And they're having that time to retrospectively look back, and our memories kind of change a little bit, when you look back at a little. And so I wanted to kind of get everything leading up to that point, because once you're there, we see it.
So when we start in part 1, we're in Brooklyn, it's like 1949, and like this pivotal character shows up in her life. It's Mariana, right?
Yeah.
Her cousin that has been through the Holocaust, lost her family, their judges, and just doing a little research, I found some personal connection to this character for you. Would you mind telling this? I didn't see a lot. I just saw there was a connection. Like, oh, I have to find out about that, because these are stories we still have to keep telling.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, cousin who is a Holocaust survivor who comes to live with her when she's 12 years old and really informs her life in so many ways. And it's really the reason that she goes to law school. She's interested in law. She kind of like wanders into, trials in Brooklyn, in New York. And okay, you have to make sure what happens there doesn't happen here. You're smart. You have to do this. And so Sylvia's entire career in life begins with that incredible weight on her shoulders. But my father, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And so my grandmother was in Auschwitz, my list. And my father was a hidden infant survivor himself. And so there's this woman named Marisha who was not Jewish and who hid my grandfather's brother in her basement throughout the whole war. Was supposed to take in my baby father, my infant father, before my grandparents were taken off to the concentration camps. And she got very, very scared and nervous at the last minute. And so my grandmother tells me this, we know the stories that she basically dropped my baby father off like on the doorstep. And this woman was supposed to take him in, and then they were taken off to the camps. She got nervous. She gave him to an orphanage instead. He was adopted by a whole other family and raised for the first 3 years of his life in the Polish countryside. And then at the end of the war, because of Schindler, my grandfather was relatively healthier than my grandmother, who was on the Wallenberg Exchange, which is part of the White Buses Initiative through the Red Cross. And so she was recovering in Sweden, which is another story. But because of Schindler, he was relatively healthy, so they had a plan to go back to their town, which is Radom, Poland, to find their son, to find my father. That was the goal, find my father. So they went back to Marisha, and that's where they thought he was. And Marisha didn't have him, but knew exactly where he was because she kept track of him. And they got my father back. And so my whole life, this woman, Marisha, had this epic significance as this woman who saved my family, who saved my father. And when about my son was 9 months old, and he's 8 now, so about 7 years ago, we had finally, my family finally taken this big trip to Poland to kind of trace your roots for the first time that they'd done that. And we were hoping to meet Marisha because they had been kept in touch on and off. And she had apparently just died a year earlier. So we didn't get to meet her. We got to meet another granddaughter. And then we went and paid our respects to her at her gravestone. And I put the flowers down and I saw her name was Mariana. And Marisha was just a nickname for Mariana. So I named Mariana after her.
And in the book, Mariana's parents were judges and part of the legal system. And
That's not true, though. And that's not with my family. No.
it makes it bonds onto Sylvia that, and for Mariana, it's like you learn the law so they can't do this again.
Exactly.
And maybe she would have been more of a rebel, and then versus Sylvia's mother, who's like, play the game. You got to be in the game to play the game. Yes. And you can ruffle feathers once you're in already. So can you kind of talk about those two influences? And then obviously Sylvia loses her mother at a very young age, and so her cousin becomes her mother-like figure. But there's always a tension and a pull between the two of them.
Yeah. So exactly. And so there's this one influence of Mariana who comes in just a few months before Sylvia's own mother dies. So Sylvia's mother dies when she's about 12 years old. And her mother wasn't born Jewish. She converted. And so she very much had this kind of mindset of let's go with everything. We can change things, but we're going to do it in a different way. Like, for example, she saved all this money for Sylvia to go to college, and to have for money, to have her own education. And she just did it in different banks all over where she was able to, because at this point, women were not allowed to take out bank accounts in their own name. They weren't allowed to have credit cards in their own name. That wasn't until 1974 that women could have credit cards in their own name. And so she found her own ways of making a difference. But she always stressed to Sylvia, like, you can make a change, but find the way to do it, within the system. And here Mariana comes and she's tortured, she's damaged by what she survived, by losing her entire family in front of her eyes, as a child. And everything is very much like, okay, no, you have to fix, like, you have to make sure that what happened there doesn't happen here. And she's very unapologetic about it. She's not emotional. She's not kind of touchy-feely. And then you have this third influence, which I'm going to jump a little bit, but with her friend Linda, who is her roommate in law school. And she's very much of the mindset of, don't apologize for anything either. Like, you have to know what you want and you have to go after it. Don't, be radical. Don't be passive about it. And so Sylvia takes these kind of three different influences, her mother figure, and her best friend, who all give her kind of a way to approach life, a way to approach change, a way to approach progress. And I wouldn't say that either one of them is right or wrong. It's that she needs kind of all of them. And I think that progress really happens, or change really happens, when you work together, when you look at all of those kind of approaches, not just one or the other.
So I wanted to talk a little bit. So you said it was like a 6-year process. So while you're writing it, RGB is still alive. Roe v. Wade is still the law. And then I was looking kind of at the timeline of what was going on. So let me just get to this part. So the hardback came out in July 23. And just like a week or two before that, the conservative majority eliminated the right to affirmative action in college admissions, allowed businesses to discriminate against LGBTQ people, struck down Biden's student loan forgiveness. A year after the abortion was overturned, they were followed by the justice had accept lavish gifts. So that's all happening when it comes out in hardback. And then it comes back in paperback the next year, and Biden's out of the president race, and we see everything shifting to Kamala Harris, and for me, the best of ways. So you had no idea 6 or 7 years ago when you were writing this, how it would come out at such pivotal, really interesting times and scary times, and just these major decisions with the court. How did that affect the writing at all? Did you have time, or did it affect the publicity tour about it? Because it's like so timely, but you started it before a lot of this. I guess it was all brewing. It was all brewing, was coming to a head.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was writing it and when I was trying to sell it, years ago, it's like, oh, it's so timely. Right now, it's so timely. And I feel like every single time that it would come up or I'd be writing it, there would be the "it's so timely" statement and thought and conversation, um, which really makes me think that these topics are, sadly or not sadly, I don't know, however you look at it, are always timely. The issues that she's dealing with 30, 40, 50 years ago, we're still dealing with, and maybe in a slightly different garment, but we're still dealing with them. And I think that just shows that society is like this, and that, some issues they just evolve. And so, I will say though, when I was writing, what was a little bit, when I was writing it, deep in the heart of writing it, I had written a lot of things before the Kavanaugh hearings. And then the Kavanaugh hearings came out. I was like, oh my God, this is really close. So I had to go back and rewrite a lot of the book because I didn't want it to look like I was copying the Kavanaugh hearings. And so, that happened a lot. So I kept thinking to myself, okay, my next book is going to be set like really far in the past or really far in the future. And I'm not doing anything contemporary, even though this is, I think, technically called historical fiction. But it feels to me like it's contemporary. And so it was something that I felt as though, I was always worried like it was happening, but I sold the book to my publisher before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died even. So it was kind of a different Supreme Court that I was writing about in many ways. But knowing that, I think that this idea of the law changes. You know, the common law is a living, breathing thing. And so it's one of those things that, and she talks about this in when she talks about the dissent, and I think it's kind of one of the few things that, well, I don't know if one of the few things, but it's something that people kind of can think about and hold on to when they talk about the idea of the dissent, is that the dissent can one day become the majority. And so that is kind of the living, breathing idea of the common law, and that it can change.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll bring Lisa back. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you used Sylvia's voice from the beginning. She would pop in. She would
Yeah.
pop in to sort of editorialize a little bit, and I loved it. Just when we're starting part 2, which is which is Harvard, and it starts with this first page. And one, I could talk for hours about James Macklow. I have so many questions and thoughts, but I'll hold that on. But I'm just going to read a little bit, because it's like this voice that pops in, and you do it over and over, and it's so effortless. I'm not even sure if some readers would notice it, but she sort of gut punches you and like kind of be like, this is important, people, look at this. So like, Jack Macklow was the dean of students at Harvard Law, and from 1950, the year that boasted the introduction of women law students, until 65 when he left. He once told me not to worry so very much about some Supreme Court decisions. The judiciary is 1/3 of a system, and individually the justices are just 1/9 of that system. Though they held power, it wasn't that much power, he said. That was then. Then I nodded and silently agreed, nervous in his company. Then I was a student, his subordinate. Then I was about to become a lawyer, an advocate. And I was so far from wearing the robe that I assumed he was right. I assumed they were all right. It takes me nearly all my life to realize they were both wrong. Though one person alone cannot create a nation, it is very easy for one person to destroy that nation. And it's the names of the destroyers, not creators, we remember most in history. I am neither creator nor destroyer. I am merely an arbitrator. So tell me, that she pops up all over. How did that work with the writing? Did you do the chronological and find the places for her to pop in? Or was she on your shoulder saying, I have something to say here?
um, that particular excerpt had moved around a lot. That one moved around a lot. And I think at some point that might have been in the I don't remember, and then we've kind of found, I kind of found like the right place for it. And other parts where it's like a one-liner or a two-liner where she's kind of intercepting the narrative a little bit. That's just to kind of just to gently remind the reader that we are looking back a little bit. And so, but it is very much, I wanted that voice in there kind of starting each of the sections to kind of ground the reader a little bit for where that section is going to be. So for example, the excerpt that you just read, that's setting up that relationship with James Macklow and her as a law student. And then there'll be another one, for section 3, when she talks about when she's a young mother and working at the ACLU and working in New York. And then the 4th one with appointments and things like that. And so, those are more, a little bit longer, those kind of paragraphs of that that kind of idea of where the narrative perches, like where she's what her perch is and where she's kind of coming in with that narrative. And others are just smaller ones that just kind of, we're just reminding you that this is a memoir, and I'm telling you my story, and I want you to remember this comment about fathers, or I want you to remember this comment about my friend Linda and what I really feel about her and things like that.
Lisa, what's on your mind?
My gosh, I just, as a former lawyer and an editor in the law for so long, I'm curious what the reception has been with all of this.
Oh, well, it's been really fun. I have to say, I've been really enjoying meeting readers. This is it's one of my favorite things to do. Obviously, after you write a book, it's just so wonderful to connect with readers and hear their interpretations. One thing that's really fun is, when you have when you put a book out in the world, you kind of have your characters, and they're yours, they're your babies, and then but they're out there in the world now, and so everyone is going to interact with them in a different way, and so it's people ask questions about like, well, why did you do that? Or why did this happen? Or I loved it when that person did that, or I hated it when that person did that. And so that's always really exciting to hear. It's very gratifying to connect with readers who felt like seen in many ways. And I think that's probably been one of the most gratifying parts of publishing this book, is to not just women, but talking to to men and women, to all people, about how certain parts of women's history, they kind of felt seen in Sylvia and Linda, in kind of their struggles and in their stories and telling that. And so I've just, I love meeting readers. I love going around and talking. And it's been also really fun talking to law students and going to law schools and kind of bar associations and things like that.
I love that. We actually have a question in the Q&A, and I'm going to read it word for word. As an attorney from East Texas and aspiring novelist now living in Southern California, I wondered if you ever have any challenges switching from your more logical legal writing brain to your more creative novelist brain. And unfortunately, I don't know who asked that question, but
Well,
Question.
love that question. That somebody's from Texas, you said? Was it
yeah,
Texas?
from East Texas, and they're on the call, and
Hi.
so they're wondering.
Well, I went to high school in Dallas, and I lived in Austin, and I went to UT Law for a semester. I did a visiting semester there, and I wrote most of my first novel in Austin. So I feel you. That's when I was really trying to do both, and it was really challenging. And I have to say, like my first year, so I did my MFA in creative writing first, and then I taught at a bunch of universities in Philadelphia, and then I went to law school. I went to law school at night at first and was teaching freshman English during the day, and that was really challenging for what exactly you're talking about, switching between that mind. And so I had a hard time with that. And I distinctly remember making this decision. I said, I've worked really hard at developing my creative voice, my creative writing voice, and that matters to me the most. And so if my super type A self doesn't do as well in legal writing classes as I would want, that's okay, because developing my creative voice was more important. I remember making that conscious decision in law school. And then I also remember thinking, okay, people with no writing experience are going to do so much better. Like coming as a blank slate, learning how to do legal writing is much easier than people coming in with a whole fiction, creative writing, any sort of literary background. Even though people think the other way around. Like after law school, I would get job offers like that. Oh, but you have all this writing experience. I'm like, no, please. That the physicality of sitting in front of my computer and writing, I need to reserve that for my fiction. I need to reserve that for my creative life. So if I'm doing anything with law, which I'm not doing much right now, but if I am, then I need it to be interactive. I need to be talking to people. I need to be doing something as far away from legal writing as possible. So I've learned that about myself. It's really hard to do both of those. And so I won't do like legal jobs that are legal writing right now. That said, I'm almost entirely in the creative writing role now in terms of writing and teaching and editing, and I have a company, Onward, that connects writers with aspiring writers with established authors. But I do still do pro bono work, and when I can volunteer. I think I mentioned like I've gone to the border, and I'm involved with an organization here in Los Angeles where I do volunteer work with a domestic violence clinic. And so, but that's interactive. And so I do think that's hard, but it's hard. It's a challenge in terms of how to do that. And so I don't know if this is helpful, but I would say, I do think that if your legal work can be not writing based, that's probably the best way. That said, I do think they work off of each other. I do think that they can work off of each other. Sometimes people overwrite in MFA programs, and so having a little bit of the logic, like whenever I teach creative writing, I am almost always using legal analogies and legal analysis, and I find it really helpful. And I hope my students do too. And so, yeah, I hope that's helpful.
We have a question. Oh yeah, Katya. And there's a larger question within the smaller. So she writes, was there a real life case similar to Amy McCartney case in the book? And I want you to talk about what was real and what was fictionalized. I would be like, looking, did this really, is that, what part is true, what part is not? So I do agree that Amy McCartney, that's when she's in contempt the first time for not speaking, and that case keeps coming up over and over. I love that question, Katya. Thank you.
Great question, Katya. Thank you. So just kind of full circle also, so the question about what people are always asking that question too, about like what's fact, what's fiction, what's real, what's not. And so that's been conversations I've had a lot over the last year. Also like about what's going on in this present Supreme Court, which this is not that, so I stay away from that. But so the Amy McCartney case is totally fictionalized, completely fictionalized. But I do remember, like way back when, actually in Texas, I was at a CLE, which a continuing legal education seminar, and I was a clerk for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals for 2 years, and I worked on. I liked criminal law a lot. Any sort of law that has a narrative, I'm interested in. Like I find fascinating. So that's criminal law, that's family law, the dispute, contracts, contractual, any sort of transactional stuff, no. But when there's a story, I'm fascinated. And so I went to this seminar. It was I don't know if it was a prosecutor. I think it was criminal in general. And I remember, and Lisa, you might have something to say about this, but I remember one of the presenters was talking about domestic violence cases. And this wasn't that one in particular, but he was talking about the fact that, about a lot of victims recanting, and that the saddest thing is that they are going back home with their abusers. But what can you do about it? And so some of that conversation, some of the language, some of the kind of discussion and analysis and kind of commentary comes from that kind of moment, but not a particular case, just kind of a thought process, or a seminar I went to in which I was hearing both prosecutors and defense attorneys, I believe, talking about domestic violence cases.
Yeah, it rang really true. I had many where I would go be the prosecutor, and the husband and wife or the boyfriend and girlfriend would walk in holding hands, and one is, it's just, yeah. But I love that you put it in there, because it was another way in which women are getting the short end of, so many things in there. One other thing, going to Katya's question, since we have a bunch of writers on here, can you talk a little bit about if someone wants to start doing historical fiction, like what kinds of things should they start knowing about, or any tips for them if they're a beginner of that?
Yeah, for historical fiction, I don't know if this is just historical fiction or just writing in general, because each of my books have been completely different. So I wouldn't, like my next one is speculative in the future. This one, I guess, is historical. My first one is, I guess, more of a thriller, and then I have a memoir mixed in there. So I think that this applies to any genre, any style of writing, but start researching, but don't over research at the beginning. And I think that's really, really key, because if you over research at the beginning, you're going down that rabbit hole. You're not going to write your book. And then you're going to feel like you have to write too similarly to what you researched, or that you're going to feel like, I don't want to waste that time or everything that I put in, so I have to use it all. And I remember with this book, with the majority, at some point I researched so much, and I was reading all the biographies, and I watched all of the every kind of Senate confirmation hearing for every Supreme Court justice that's like available on YouTube. And I went to the Supreme Court, and I took tours and this, that, and the other. I had worked in a state Supreme Court office, judges chamber, so I had kind of personal experience, but in a smaller capacity. But I remember that at a certain point, you have to kind of separate and realize that you're writing fiction. So a lot of that information you can come back to. What's most important is the characters. Once you know your character, then you can create the habitat. You can create the setting and the environments that they're living in, and work within that. But if you over research, you don't want to write a textbook.
Can you tell me a little bit how it was shifting from memoir to this book? Was it freeing because you could make things up, or was it hard to get into the voice because you were used to writing for your last book in your own story? Can you tell a little bit? Because we have a lot of memoir writers that write one and then they're starting something else, and it's a shift.
Yeah, I love that. So I went kind of fiction. I went novel, memoir, novel, and I have like a memoir in me, but I feel I was talking to my husband like I should do like another novel before I do another memoir. But I love both art forms, I have to say, just deeply. But I really think that the story calls for the medium, like for the genre and the medium. Like it has to feel right, and you just know that. But I actually tend to write them almost exactly the same way. I don't think that the rules of the kind of process is different. I think the difference is that you're making up the story as opposed to as obviously as opposed to memoir in which you're pulling out parts of your story. And so it's in some ways it's a little harder with memoir because you have this Rolodex of experiences and memories, and you've got to pick that one or two that represents that moment, right? And then you've got to like flash forward and then like realize that not everything in your manuscript, not everything in your life needs to go in your manuscript. Like I teach memoir, and I love teaching memoir. I teach memoir more than I teach fiction, even though I write more fiction than memoir. But I absolutely love it, and I love working with writers because, and one of the hardest things that I found is that there's this need, there's this like kind of gut desire to put every single part of your life into that book, and that is not effective. And that is really, really hard. And you don't have that as much in fiction because you're writing it, you're creating it. And so you're going to have a lot of extra scenes that you're probably not going to use, that you're going to have that Rolodex of scenes that you've written, so to speak, but not as many because you haven't lived that life, right? You're making it up. And so I find that is kind of the biggest difference between the two. But I write both in fragments. I write very fragmentarily, and I write non-linearly. And so I kind of piece things together after I already have some idea of what I'm doing. And that's the same for memoir as it is for fiction. And I even do kind of that opening sort of prologue that grabs you, hopefully kind of summarizes kind of the ideas and the themes of the book in memoir as well as in fiction. So I found that, in writing, it's very much a similar process. It's just one, I'm making up the stories, and the other I'm not.
I'm going to do one last question, then we'll go to Lisa for one last question, and then we have just a few quick announcements. There was one part that I really enjoyed through part 3 when you kind of talked about the pendulum of progress and regression. And I feel like that resonates again so strongly in our times right now. And she talks about like progress and regression, a little bit forward, a little bit back, like a zipper caught in a thread. Did you know that that was going to be woven into the story, kind of one of the major themes? I thought that was such a beautiful symbol for, as we kind of bounce between the two poles back and forth, make a lot of progress, step back, progress, step back. I thought that was a beautiful analogy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think that's like that other passage that you pulled out. I think that one also moved around a few times in the book until it found its right home, its right place. And so I think that was a theme that I was very interested in exploring, that idea, because and I try to think about that when I get nervous about anything. And so I think, okay, that if we really do examine history, that is what happens. It is this pendulum, or and it's true. Whenever something gets caught, I mean, it's the same. Your zipper, you have to go up, back and forth before you bring it all the way up. You have to go back. Same when you get your car stuck in the mud. Sometimes it has to go back before it goes forward. And it's not as strong of a metaphor, so I didn't go in the book. But I do think that idea is important, and I think it's also hopeful. And it's something that definitely applies to Sylvia, and I think every character in the book, because they all have their back and forth moments in which, I think that also represents the human experience, because we're not all on a single trajectory upward. We all go back and forth. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets, and she talks about her regrets very proudly. I mean, she owns them. And I think that I like regret. I think it's something that we kind of shy away from a lot. And we talk about mistakes and being proud of your mistakes and like say they define you, but I think regret is the same in the same boat, because I think it's a kind of mistake, but it's one that you're kind of perseverating on and you're thinking about so much, and hopefully it's something that you've learned from, and it also kind of teaches you. It teaches you what you really wanted, and you didn't really know that until maybe you had that regret, and so once you have that regret, you've figured it out. And you can kind of move forward in a way that hopefully brings peace.
Lisa, our closing question. What do you got?
Well, I always go back to the writers that are, tuning in. And so you've written quite a few books now. What is a realistic timeline and the amount of drafts for all of the writers out there?
Oh, well, this is going to vary based on person, obviously. You've got some writers who like put out a book every other year and they will have a very different answer than me. And there's other people who put out a book every 20 years and they'll have a different answer than me. I hope I'm every like 4-year person, 4 to 5 year person, 3 to 5 years maybe, but it's been 6 years between books for
You're
this
getting
one.
a college degree in it. A college degree. It's a college 4-year, 5-year program.
It is. It's at least that. And honestly, you're learning that you're learning, and each book is going to teach you something. And I wrote 2 novels before Noah P. Singleton that did not sell. And that's a very common story. And I want that to be something that people own also. But, I want to say hundreds of drafts, but I don't print out every single draft, so it's kind of hard to say what defines a draft. What I do is I will say I want to make sure I have that that Lamont shitty first draft, but I'm not I'm kind of like a sort of outliner, but not really an outliner. So I have like a very loose idea of what I'm doing. And then I just throw the paint on the page. It's almost like an extended outline that is a first draft, but I don't even think of that as a draft. I think of that as just like that's my materials. And so I think of that as like I made the palette. I made my paint palette. I can't paint anything without a paint palette. And so my first figuring out what the characters are, what the story might be, is putting the words on the page, and that's me getting the paint on the palette. Then I get to paint my first draft. And so that might take a year to get the words, or a year or 2 to get the words on the page to create that paint palette. It might take less. It depends. If I'm doing a million things at once, which I am, then I always feel like if I'm just doing this, like I went to a residency in March for 2 weeks, and it was the first time, 2.5 weeks, and it was the first time I'd really been able to get away in maybe 8 years like that. That wasn't a book promotion, thing, but it just to write. And I got more done in that time than I did in 2 years, 2.5 weeks. And I haven't touched it since, but in large part because I'm doing a million other things, writing related, writing adjacent, writing essays, short pieces, editing. But I feel like as I get older, as my kids get older, as life kind of streamlines a little bit more, you kind of start figuring out how that works. And so I want to say like getting that, call it making the paint palette, that could take about a year, maybe another 6 months to a year to kind of I'd say maybe another few months to get a proper draft out of that. Then I give it to some readers. Then I'll get back, I'll do another revision, and then I'll give it to my agent and we'll talk about it. And then there's probably gonna be another few drafts, until we send it to the editor. And I don't know, this draft took a really long time, but in large part that was because it was during COVID and so many things happened. So I feel, my memoir that had a much shorter gestation, I sold it as a proposal. And so I wrote that in a year. I wrote the proposal in 6 months and I wrote the book in a year. This one was 6 years, but I wrote short stories and other novel excerpts in it, so it's kind of hard to judge. But all of that is to say is there's no clear one way to do it, and expect many, 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 many drafts. And right when you think you have the draft, put it down, sit away from it for a month at least. Let somebody, then come back to it, read it yourself with fresh eyes, read it out loud, give it to somebody else. And you will find something. I read this book, I'll find a million things that I want to change now. You know, it just, you have to have that time, and you have to kind of give it the space it needs to grow. But know that you're gonna have a million drafts, and that's okay, because that's normal. That's expected. That should have a lot of drafts.
Oh, Elizabeth, this has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing your writing journey and how this amazing book came to be and your personal history. You know, we're just thrilled to be with Warwick's and have the Festival Book Club, and we're so grateful you're able to be with us today.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me. This was an amazing conversation. I loved your questions. They were fantastic. Thank you.
Well, we are incredibly fortunate to have the support of our partners, the Coronado Public Library and Warwick's of La Jolla. We're delighted that Julie Slavinsky, the director of events at Warwick's, recommended the majority, and grateful for all of Amanda's help behind the scenes today. And a special thank you to you, Elizabeth. It's really been a pleasure. Just a reminder, though, for you guys, because Julie's normally here to give us a few events that Warwick's does. Next week, they are actually having Frances Mays at the store to discuss and sign her new book, A Great Marriage. And Frances Mays is the author of 4 books about Tuscany, including Under the Tuscan Sun. So I don't know about you guys, I loved that. So be sure to check their website for upcoming events.
And we just have a couple of quick announcements, and this is a big one, is that mark your calendars for Festival U. It's a full day of world-class programming, online learning. It's a phenomenal day as our main fundraiser for the 2025 San Diego Writers Festival, and 100% of the proceeds will help fund it, and it'll help us keep the festival free. It'll be held Saturday, September 14th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Zoom. There'll be 8 sessions held throughout the day. Each session will last approximately 45 minutes and include 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A. Our focus this year is on publishing, and we have so many stellar guests, agents, publishers, New York Times bestselling authors. Space is limited, so grab your tickets now. And if you can't make it on the 14th, if you buy a ticket, you can have access to the whole day of programming. And we just had a recent addition to the lineup, and I'm thrilled to announce that the powerful duo of Anne Lamott and Neil Allen will be at Festival U. They're going to be at 1 p.m. Neil's the author of Better Days, How to Tame Your Inner Critic, and he will interview his partner about her newest book, Somehow Thoughts on Love. And if you haven't seen the two of them together, it's charming, it's beautiful, and just a great experience. So that's a new lineup. And Lisa, a little bit more to share.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I was at Neil's panel, or his talk at this last year's book festival, and it was so fun. What else are we doing? We've got, backed by popular demand, is the Ask an Agent Anything session. There's also an amazing panel on publishing with 3 small press publishers, plus authors Zibby Owens, Mark Levine, Chip Connolly, and more. It's $60 for the day-long event, as well as access to the recorded Zoom sessions in case you have to miss one. And there's more Festival U programming to share with you. Tracy will be interviewing memoirist Elizabeth Gutierrez about her amazing about her debut memoir, My Side of the River, which is a New York Times editor's pick. And we're ending the day strong with the jam-packed presentations on the A to Z of publishing with our very own Anastasia Zidek. Again, please check the chat to get your Festival U tickets now. And then, one other news thing, the San Diego Writers Festival has a date for our 6th year. We're returning to the beautiful Coronado Library and Performing Arts Center. Please put Saturday, April 5th on your calendar. This is going to be our best year yet. We have some exciting surprises in the works. If you would like to be an exhibitor or submit to be a presenter, stay tuned. In the coming weeks, we will be advertising the links to participate.
And I'm just putting something in the chat, so we're good. Hold on a quick second. We've got a lot of hats going on here. Almost. Okay. And the next thing we want to talk about just real quickly is you want to stay up to date on all the memoir showcase announcements and news from the International Memoir Writers Association. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter. There's a link in the chat. And while you're at it, why don't you sign up for the San Diego Writers Festival monthly newsletter? That newsletter highlights writing events and organizations across San Diego for all genres and all levels of writing. It's a way to be a part of the SDWF community all year round. And there's a link to sign up in the chat. And then one final announcement before we end. You still have time to get in your memoir showcase submission. This year's theme is But I Did It Anyways. And you have until this Sunday, August 18th, so 11:59 p.m. on Sunday night to get your story submitted. And this could be your year. This contest, if you don't know it, it offers 2 ways to be published. 8 to 9 writers will be featured in the 10th Annual Memoir Showcase theatrical performance at 7 p.m. on Friday, December 6th at the David and Dorothea Garfield Theater in UTC. And then another 20 writers will be published in Shaking the Tree Volume 8 in January in 2027. So also please remember to save the date for the 10th Annual Showcase. Again, it's the 6th of December. It's a Friday night, 7 p.m. at the Garfield Theater in UTC. Stay tuned for more ticket information. And that's all I got.
That's it. Stay tuned for the news on the next book pick. And thank you again, Elizabeth. It was awesome to have you. And we're looking forward to your next book. We'll be ready.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, did you ask me something?
I just said thank you. I don't have any, I can't, it was everything that I wanted. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Good night.